This is a poem, as I may have said in some of the notices, that that a singer-songwriter, young singer-songwriter, if I can say it, took my poem written at about age 18 or 19. I was still in high school, so probably it was more like 16 or 17. And he took that juvenile poem of mine and used it as the lyrics for his song. So I won't tell you who the singer is, but I'll read the song. I'll read the poem first. Well, I won't. Why don't you go ahead and play it, Meg?
Okay.
Can people hear it? You could stop it, Mike. Anybody have any idea who the singer is? You wouldn't. It's an unfair question.
I'll take a guess.
Okay.
Well, it sounded like, what's the guy's name that was in the Humphrey Bogart movie with the guy that plays the piano? No?
I'm not old enough for that to be
Okay, well,
to have provided the lyrics for that. I don't think. No, it's my grandson, Doug Barber, and you'll see on the table outside a picture. You'll notice it. It's a picture of him and his wife, and the two of us, and also there's a little poem underneath it that I wrote for their wedding. So that is the singer. And he is a composer and singer, and this is his group. They have performed this song. I understand was performed in Chicago. An unusual group. I won't go into it, but this is my grandson. Okay. And I won't read the poem because it's pretty much, he took the lyrics.
Please
And
read it. Do you have
I have it on my computer.
Okay, great.
I did print it, but it's not here. I must have at the last minute then. So, I'm going to read a few poems. I've asked Meg to stop me at 10 of 3 because I have something a little different that I want to do at that point. And I'm going to use the clipboard here. Okay, this is a poem I've written in the past. I'll be reading, I don't think I'll read any more of my juvenilia. The poem that I put on the poster, I won a statewide poetry contest, had the #1 poem in the state in around 1956. It's a good poem, but it's not, I won't read it. Oh, and let me say a word about the promised sampler. Once again, I didn't quite get it done. It's in the works. If I don't have your email, just send me an email saying sampler, and I'll assume you would like it by email attachment, unless you say otherwise. If you say otherwise, I'll put it in mail to you. Okay. So this is a poem I wrote about 3 weeks ago, I think, to my brother. And it's one of 2, and maybe I'll read you the other one from my computer, my laptop. This is called Enlightenment, for my brother Tom. You were my guide and protector. Oh yeah, I need my glasses. They help. I'll start again. Enlightenment. You were my guide and protector, my older brother, always bigger and stronger, and having the heavier weight that helped you pin me down when occasionally we fought it out because we couldn't stand each other any longer. I fought with the awareness that you could beat me up anytime you really wanted to. You generally pulled your punches out of brotherly love. We divvied up by the way, it'll be obvious here, I grew up on a farm in a family of 6, a working farm, very much so. We divvied up the chores, morning and evening, part of the farm work we both endured, something from which we'd flee as soon as we could. The deal that we made was that I would do nearly all the other chores if you would milk the cow, your hands being bigger, stronger, better able to squeeze the tits, to squirt the milk hissing into the pail. It was you who first explained to me the birds and the bees, how it all worked, how men did their thing and women got babies. And to your credit, for a 12-year-old, you got it mostly right, except for which female orifice was the essential one. If ever I attain the state of enlightenment, I suspect I will learn that there are other openings waiting to be sorted out. I'm going to, Meg, what did you do with my computer? You have it?
Yes.
Oh, it's right here. I think in my rush I left the other poem I want to read on the computer, so I will quickly look it up. Okay, it's called Mowing Hay on Memorial Day for Tom Rader, my older brother. Same brother. Punctually on the hour, under the heartless Hoosier sun, one brother, the relief driver, would hail the other, then haul himself up to the tractor seat, perch on the fender, and over the roar of the engine, deliver at pit crew speed the latest Indy 500 update. What lap? Who's leading? How many accidents and yellow flags? What unlucky driver hit the wall or just spun out on the infield grass? Which one crashed into the wall? Now relieved, the other brother would dismount and cross the field to the house to slug down a quart of ice-cold water and flop onto the couch, all the while savoring once again the radio voices of the greatest spectacle in racing. Back in the hayfield heat, the new driver would drive on, lap after lap around the shrinking oval, as the relentless sickle bar mowed down the thick, tall grass. Oops, my cursor, I couldn't recognize that letter. He would constantly scan ahead, watching out for the meadowlark, always trying his very best to spot and spare her hidden nest. But meantime, he could only watch helplessly when the hapless rabbit, flushed out from his green home and forced to flee for his life, would lose a lucky foot, then lay down a trail of fresh blood as he desperately fled from the mower to the meager refuge of the fence row. Now that I wrote just about exactly a year ago, May of 2024. So I may need to, if I've lost poems that I wanted to read, I have to resort to that. My clip. Feel free to interrupt with questions now. We don't need necessarily to, especially if they're brief questions. This is a poem. I noticed a clipping in the Barry Montpelier Times Argus, or the Times Argus of Barry Montpelier. I don't know. One of them still exists, I think. Way back years ago, in fact, in 1976, an article, his obituary, this man's obituary, appeared in the Times Argus. And so over the years, I tried to write a poem about it, and it was too long and it was rambling. And recently I picked it up again and shortened it considerably. So here's it's called Eulogy. And the headline is, J. Gordon Kempton Dies, Made Shingles and Cider. Headline in the Barry Montpelier, Vermont Times Argus, January 23rd, 1976. Now here's a Zen saying that some of you will probably be familiar with. Before enlightenment, a man cuts wood and carries water. After enlightenment, a man cuts wood and carries water. J. Gordon Kempton wrote his story in cedar and apples. Before and after whatever measurement of enlightenment, he picked and hauled the apples, split the cedar chunks, and screwed down the press and caught the juices. He ripped his parchment from the heart of cedar, dipped his quill in the ink of apple, and crafted his manuscript. And that was finally finished a few weeks ago. Okay. I don't usually write poems for occasions, but my brother-in-law celebrated his 82nd birthday recently. And he's a very gentle, very sweet man. Well, the name of the poem is Gentleman, and he is truly a gentleman. For Fred Stetson, on the occasion of his 82nd birthday. And I did write this and read it to him that day. To the end of his days, my father remembered you. Being wheeled in his wheelchair up and down the carpeted corridors of his Scottsdale nursing home, the perfectly straight rows of his life's final farm, he would lean forward and down to his left, pulling up, I assumed, the weeds that he had spotted there. But at other times he was still as present and sharp as ever as he stalked his elusive 100th birthday. He died 23 days, I believe, before his 100th birthday. I'll start again that stanza. But at other times he was still as present and sharp as ever as he stalked his elusive 100th birthday, still recalling from time to time how you had ministered to his needs that cold Vermont spring 34 years ago, chauffeuring him and his wife to and from the hospital where I usually have trouble with this line, where their son lay in a coma, possibly dying. Now there was a gentleman, he would say, a real gentleman. It was his highest compliment. How are we doing on time? 25. You know, what I think I did was not pick up the last batch from the printer in my rush. Whoops. Okay, this is a little poem I wrote back in 2016, so this is what now, 9 years ago in December, as I see actually 3 days before Christmas. It's called Beach Walk. Let me say a little bit about my technique up to now of how I write a poem. And I do believe that any of us is capable of being a poet. I happen to be very lucky, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. In my education and the opportunities I've had over the years, I had a major poet in the South, at least, as a high school teacher for 2 years. And he really inspired me to be a poet. And that's how I came to write the poem that won the state contest, etc. What I generally do, and I often take my phone with me, and whether I'm walking or well, now I listen to CNN without sound, or PBS, or I would listen to Fox. Well, no, I don't listen to them. I have the sound off. I can't stand the commercials. My wife can't stand any of it. But I can get what I need, what I need from the scroll and the anyway, I don't need to. What I'm listening for is poetry, what I call poetry in news. And I'll come back to this when I talk about where my poetry is leading now, I think. I think anytime you hear someone use it can be a trite phrase, but if it's colorful, like on a slippery slope, something's on a slippery slope, or the elephant in the room, or any of these cliches you hear all the time. They originally were fresh metaphors or similes. And so that's the poetry I listen for when I listen, when Meg's not around, and I watch for, and I see a new direction for my poetry to take based on that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But let me read, this is one from 2016, and what I was going to say is I was walking on the beach, and we lived in the New North End of Burlington, and the beach isn't isn't great, but it's nice to get out and take a walk and so on. And this was one of those days. And what happens to me as a poet, and I'm declaring myself a serious poet, is that phrases occur to me, lines. And I'm discovering now, to my pleasure, that I don't have to write them down right away. My mind is clear enough around what happens that I retain those lines, although I usually try to capture them pretty quick. So this is called Beach Walk, and you'll see I walked, I had these lines coming to me, I had my phone with me, and notes on the phone you can actually dictate, so you can capture. If I'm a poet, I'm a internet era poet, and anyway, the technology is an important part of how I write nowadays. So this is called Beach Walk. Transient beings have left their record printed in the damp sand, the mud flats and scrims of snow, the delicate script of the skittering shorebirds, the boulder typeface of webfoot and dogpaw, and over it all, the meddling edit of my own shod feet. Now here's a recent poem that's a little difficult, but I'm going to try to read it. I don't think I read it before to anybody. It's complex in that it has a epigram. I kind of like epigrams. And it's, again, a found poem in that sense, that it's based on something I found in a newspaper from 1898. And then there's a footnote. So I'm going to read the clipping. This is an actual article in the Aurora, Indiana Dearborn Independent, February 25th, 1898, and it was on page 1. And then I'll read the footnote, which ties into my life growing up in southwestern Indiana. And then I'll read the poem. A religious lunatic, that's the headline. George Rosenberg, an influential farmer near Odin, has become religiously insane. He says he has received a command direct from God telling him to sacrifice his entire family or suffer eternal damnation. He thinks he must slay his wife, 8 children, and himself with a knife, and has tried to execute the order. By the way, well, I'll get to that. I have a footnote to that story when it mentions Odin. Odin is a small town in southwest Indiana, only about 6 miles from the family farm where I grew up. My maternal grandmother grew up in Odin and was married to my grandfather in 1915 at the Odin Hotel. Thus, my great-grandparents, whom I knew during their later years and during my earliest years, would most likely have known the influential Mr. Rosenberg. So the title of the poem is Farmer George Goes Up Mount Moriah. And some of you may recognize some of the references here. I'll read it and then we'll talk. I'll tell you some of the, in case it's a little too obscure. I'll say biblical, right? Farmer George went up Mount Moriah with his wife and their children for a family picnic. While Sarah and the kids went off to pick berries, George built a fire, laid the rope on a bush, and sat down on a log to sharpen his knife. With water from a jug, he wetted the whetstone, then over and over, drew steel over stone, and prayed, waiting for God's further command. Obviously, it's based on Abraham's going up, and that the mountain Abraham went up to slay Jacob was Mount Moriah, so what struck me, of course, was that here he's being considered a religious lunatic, where Abraham is not. Enough said.
Jim, did the family we survive?
I don't know. I may do some more. I have I've had a couple now. I think I only have one of these services where you can search newspapers, and some, you know, they have different newspapers apparently are acquired by different. Unfortunately, you can't get just one, but it's great fun, and I do a lot of research, and I run across stuff. Yeah.
Where is the south that you referred to in that poem? How far down south?
In Indiana,
In the last poem you referenced.
south. Let me see here. Oh, I said southwestern Indiana, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah, if you picture Indiana, there's the Ohio River is the southern curvy border. And then the Wabash River, which the college I attended, Wabash College, is not on the Wabash River, by the way. And there is a Wabash County too, and a town Wabash. But the Wabash River, the rest of Indiana is pretty square, rectangle, except for a little bit of Lake Michigan up here. And then Ohio down here, and then the Wabash juts out to the junction of the Ohio and the Wabash. And my farm, my parents' farm where I grew up, was in that little part of the state. Anyway, very rural. Some of it hilly. Where I grew up was a drained marsh. It had been after the Aboriginals were driven out. The Europeans drained the swamp. They dredged ditches, and that was an important part of very, very rich farmland because it had been swamp. And then a little ways away for a while, my family moved to a hill farm. And I think, just a little sidebar here, I think what was very romantic to his children, including me, these hills and hollows, 219 acres of our place, mostly raising livestock, sheep, cattle, hogs. But anyway, what was romantic to us was a failure to my father, because from the standpoint of farming, it was a disaster. But my older brother, whom I referred to, wrote fiction, and my younger sister, who's unfortunately not with us anymore, she was a poet and published some of her poetry. Okay. I guess I will read, this is still probably a draft, called I Do Not Believe in Miracles. And I think I've still got draft on here because I'm not quite happy with it. By the way, the poet Paul Valéry, French poet, once said, "A poem is never finished, it's only abandoned." And I find that true, that at some point you give up on trying to improve it. Even though you worry it to death, you keep seeing words that you change. But gradually, most of the time, it does get a little better. So this is called I Do Not Believe in Miracles. And the epigraph here is from my high school teacher, whom I'll talk more about in just a minute. And this is a quote from his poem, Though I Do Not Believe. I do not expect to be lifted up from the floor of being any further than a mouse is. That's a fragment from his poem. And now my poem. Oh, and then a second quote from George Scarborough, my teacher. It's the title of another of his poems, And As for Gods, There Are So Many. And now what I've done with it. I do not believe in miracles, and I watch them happen every single day. I watch, oh, by the way, this is definitely a draft. so this is the way I work. There's a paragraph here, and when I wrote this out longhand, I use a lot of abbreviations, a lot of blanks. I can't think of a word, I just put a blank. I'll put a word with a question mark because I'm not sure it's the right word. I use a lot of abbreviations, so I can write fast because of that. So I'll read you the fragmentary thing. I watch, sunrise, the oak root continuing to lift the sidewalk year after year, the dandelion continuing to do its thing every spring, the dance of blank, dot, dot, dot. The monarch's annual migration to the same place, and I've got a note to myself, specify the place they go in Mexico. Then I'm back to writing semblance of poetry again. In my world, water safe to drink still flows from the faucet. Excuse me. Even hot water on demand. The miracles continue. With the devoutest of devout fundamentalists, I watch the solar eclipse in wonder. No gods, but I cannot but believe all the universe is a miracle. And then another fragmentary line, the ordinary miracles, occurred to me as a phrase, dot, dot, dot. And finally, this is going back to the fundamentalist. And by the way, I grew up as a fundamentalist. That's a whole other story. In spite of his Bible thumping, I feel closer to the most devout, true Christian than I do to the person who says that all this has happened by blind chance. So it's got possibilities, but we'll see. But maybe it gives you a little insight into how at least I write. And when I say I think anyone could be a poet, it's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of looking at the world with curiosity and making connections. What I do is I'll see something, and I'll see something else within a day or so, and I'll make a connection between them. It's maybe not obvious at first. And then I'll let it sit for a while, and then it kind of gestates, kind of an unconscious process. And I will also say that my best poems, I think, and unfortunately I left at least one I wanted to read behind, and I won't take time again. But it's like, where the hell did that come from? I woke up the other morning, trying to remember, it wasn't the poem to my brother Tom, but a poem just came like that. I couldn't write fast enough. It flowed off my pen. Where did it come from? Well, I'm having trouble remembering exactly which poem it is, but I know it had been gestating in my mind again. But it was like I was taking dictation. And I don't believe in God, at least not the bearded man up in the sky. Okay, we're winding down here. Some people at my first reading said that my poems were dark. This is maybe the darkest. It's called After Watching Alain René's film Night and Fog, which is a film this Frenchman made. I've read about it, I don't know a lot about it, but I went to see it and I came home and wrote this poem many years ago. I've revised it a bit. That poor Jew Jesus took half a day to die. 2 nights he rested in a rich man's tomb. And then there are these, piled up pietas, bulldozered, tumbling, cartwheeling, end over end. And somehow the printer didn't print the last, but as I remember the last line, end over end in my mind's mass grave. It's a black and white movie, and in this scene there are human bodies piled up in the Nazi Germany scene, and a bulldozer is tumbling them into a mass grave.
Can you read that stanza about the pietas again?
Yeah, as I said, let me write down the line so I don't flub it. Well, I think I'll remember it. And then there are these piled up pietas, bulldozered, tumbling, cartwheeling, end over end in my mind's mass grave. And while we're on the subject of the unpleasant subject, Meg and I are very proud of our oldest daughter. And part of the display out here, this end of the table on this side, is something that she went to Auschwitz. She's been active for about, Meg, would you say 5 years? About 5 years on the southern border. What happened? A man named Josh, right? Joshua Levin. When the separation of families started happening, he was so outraged. He lived in Brooklyn. He'd been a financial person. No, what? We don't know. But he was a professional. And I think maybe in his 70s or late 60s. But he was so outraged by what was happening, he felt he had to go down to Texas. He stood across the road from one of the detention centers where the children were being kept. And I should remember which one it was, but it was one of the first ones, maybe the first one. And he just stood there, and after a while, at least, he began to hold up a sign so the kids maybe could see over the fence saying, "We love you," or whatever. Well, our daughter, who's now, she'll be 65 this year, she soon went and joined him. And it's called Witness on the Border. It's an organization now, and she's very active and part of a team that comes up with ideas of how to deal with the horrible situation down there. And she, at some point along, took a trip to Europe and visited Auschwitz, where they have, as I understand it from her, they have a museum there. And one of the exhibits that was on exhibit at the time was the badges, ironic word I think, that the inmates, the people in the concentration camps, had to wear. And they were all based on triangles. The Star of David, of course, has 2 triangles, but pink triangle was for gays. I think either red or black was for communists. But blue, a triangle with pointing down, but with blue, was for immigrants. There, I don't know how many immigrants they imprisoned, but Carla, seeing this, thought that might be a symbol, to use in the United States. And so it's now been rolled out. Witness for the Border and about 20 at least other organizations are promoting it. It came out about a month ago, I guess. And there's some literature about it in the border. Feel free, there are peel off the symbol that you can wear. It says, I support, I stand with immigrants. And anyway, we're very proud of her. While I'm talking about the exhibits, on the north wall, the left there, is a table devoted to stuff about me, okay? On the opposite side, most of the table is George Scarborough, my high school teacher, who, before he died, he was a Tennessee poet. How he ended up in Indiana, at my little country high school, I don't know, but he did. And he inspired me a lot around poetry. He eventually was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize in literature. He didn't receive it, but it was, I think, to honor him for a lifetime of work, and he was a fine poet. He died in, I believe, 2008. 2008, I believe, in Tennessee. But most of that table is about him. Now, My first meal at Wake Robin was as a guest of Jean Connor, whom you know the library is named for. She was a fine poet. I was in a group with her. I think there are probably some other people here today who consider themselves poets who are part of that group. We all knew who the real poet was. And as you may know, Jean went on to win the, what is it called? It's I'll think of the name in a minute. It's a nationwide contest for older poets. I think you have to be over a certain age, and maybe it has to be your first publication, I'm not sure. But Jean won that, and on the table there's her book. I don't know whether I ever got her to autograph it or not. But she invited me to come here and have dinner with her. I don't remember whether you were along, Meg, or not. But anyway, that was my first time in this dining room was with Jean. And she was a fine person and a fine poet. How are we doing on time?
Just about 12 minutes.
12
Before 3.
before 3. Okay, I'm going to read a couple more poems about death. I don't think I have a preoccupation with death, but I think the fact that we're all mortal, and being here in Wake Robin, you see I was walking down the hall of the second floor of Maple yesterday morning, and I turned the corner. Yesterday morning or the morning before, I get my days mixed up. And here was the door, wide open. I don't think the bins were there yet. Joe Elovich's apartment. And you know, also we see the pictures there in the lobby when someone's died. It's a fact of life, and you're reminded of it constantly here. And I think it's a very important and a very reasonable. I think it's one of the greatest facts of human existence, or any existence. And I do believe, like George Scarborough said in his poem, we're not elevated any more than a mouse is. This is my belief. But I considered myself an atheist at one point. I then decided I was an agnostic. I don't know what I am now, but anyway. This is called Lakeview Cemetery, and it's written for someone sitting in the back of the room. We've purchased our burial plot, a place where we might enjoy the view of lake and mountains for all eternity. I rode out there on my bike this afternoon and searched for our spot, but couldn't find it. And this will probably be, I am planning a book. It will be called, and I haven't read that, forgot to read the title poem. It's called Upright. Guess I'll have to do another reading someday. This is called I Do Not Doubt That I Will Die. And the backstory on this is a good friend of ours, and we were living in Grand Isle. He was an EMT, and he told us, we had seen this story in the paper, about going to an accident on Route 2. I know where the spot is. It's a slight curve. There's visibility problems. But a man and his son were driving north, I believe, and someone came around the corner in the middle of their path, and he said they didn't have time to think before they were head-on and killed. So this is called I Do Not Doubt That I Will Die. I do not doubt that I will die, though the time and place and manner are yet to be determined. All that I ask is to see it coming, if even for an instant, so that I might invite death in like an old friend that I've been expecting. Now, I'd like to take a little slight turn and read a poem I just wrote 2 or 3 days ago. And it's called An Easy Essay. easy essay in quotes, and it's with apologies and homage, however you say it, to Peter Moran, 1877 to 1977. And I'll say more about who Peter Moran was. Oh, this is the one that poured off my pen. I didn't, it was like I was taking dictation. My most honest poems come unbidden at 4:15 in the morning. The negotiators for their people, for prosperity, for peace, should be required while they are negotiating to wear only the clothing of the poorest of their people and to eat only the food, only the food, the common food of their common people. Celebrity and fame should be granted only to those who no longer need celebrity or fame. So what's today, the 16th? 3 days ago I wrote that. And it may point a new direction in what I try to do in my poetry. As I said, I listen and sometimes I just watch the news. And I try to watch and listen as a poet. And what I mean by that is I listen for certain kinds of, often what was once colorful language but now is cliche in many cases. And I listen for connections. And here's my vision, I guess I'll say, that I hope if I live long enough and if the world keeps going, if we keep losing our democracy, my opinion, and a lot of other people's opinion, I want to be ready to be part of the resistance, and I'll say that openly. And I see poetry as a possible tool, a very powerful tool in that, again, if I live long enough. And so I see, and this is probably a little, what shall we say? What's the word, Meg? Anyway, a little over the top. But I do believe that someone, I believe it was Plato, once said that poets are the unrecognized legislators of the world, something like that. I don't think they are. They may inspire legislators, but I think they could be the unrecognized force. That the force of poetry could serve the needs of a resistance. And I don't think I'm romanticizing or underestimating or overestimating the crisis we face. So, yeah, again, that may not come to pass, but that's what I'm looking at right now. So, an easy essay. Peter Moran lived, as you could tell, 100 years. He's one of the founders of the Catholic Worker. I think maybe he was the founder of the Catholic Worker before Dorothy Day. But he certainly worked with Dorothy Day and Ammon Hennessy. And I had the pleasure of spending an evening with Ammon Hennessy once, licking envelopes in Chicago. And so I think I'm ready for questions. It's actually almost 3 o'clock, sorry. Any questions or comments?
When you have a good first draft, how often do you rewrite your poems? Are you a big rewriter or a...
Oh, I think any poet. Now, whether I will rewrite one like this that came to me kind of, I'll let it sit a while, I think, before I try to mess with that. But it is a coming together of very different elements that are juxtaposed. Let me go back to the poem that my grandson turned into a song. I think it's the only, perhaps the only one of my childhood, teenage, let's say. I started writing poetry in the second grade, but that was in imitation of the hymns that we sang in my fundamentalist church. I was really touched by them, and I liked rhyme, But then as a teenager, and when I had George Scarborough, whom I've not talked enough, but you can see the exhibit out there. I think I only wrote one poem that achieved what Robert Bly used to call, you got it right here, leaping poetry. And what he meant by leaping poetry, he did a lot of, I assume, and actually I spent a weekend with Robert Bly once, but that's when he was into his woo-woo about male and female and stuff, out at Shelburne Farms. I left halfway through the second workshop with him because I needed to go walk in the woods out there. But Bly had this idea. He did a lot of translation, Neruda and other poets in I think both Spanish and French. And his idea of leaping poetry was that a good poem, a really good poem, at some point during the poem makes a leap. It jumps to a different level. And I don't think I've achieved that very often in my own poetry, but I think in that poem, The Call of the Rain Crow, that Doug Barber, my grandson, turned into a song, I think I did it, and I don't know why. I also wrote that as a prose poem. And by the way, when I finish this damned sampler that I promised, and it'll be within the next few days, I will include maybe both of those, because I did make the leap there, and I don't. And again, it sort of comes full blown. You don't know where it came from. I could tell some of why I was on that track, but I can't explain. And that's a part of the magic when that happens. And it doesn't happen very often. But, I see writing poetry as a combination of keeping your eyes open, being curious, listening a lot, and I'm doing more of that now than I've done in years. For many years, I said jokingly, I wrote a poem every 4 years. And that wasn't too much of an exaggeration. Now I start maybe 4 poems a day. And, some of them don't go anywhere, but so, I'm reminded here, I was talking to Sally Conrad the other day, and she was coming out of the art room, and we got talking. I think she asked me, she came, I think, to my first poetry reading. Anyway, we got to talking about putting her stake in the ground as an artist. And she said that once she met the father of a local, I guess he was an artist, he was a painter. I think he may even still be alive. Trying to make sure I've got his name right. Magdoff is his last name. One's Harry, and anyway, his father was a leading socialist editor, put out a magazine. I don't think it was Monthly Review. So she was meeting him, and he was asking about what she did. And she mentioned that she painted, but she maybe had, I don't know how much Sally had done at that point, but she's a fine watercolorist now and maybe works in other media. And so she was kind of talking about dabbling in painting and, kind of putting her own work down. And he said, "Are you a painter or not?" And that changed her life. In other words, he was saying, if you're a painter, say you're a painter. And so I now have decided to say I'm a poet. And Neil.
Do you have a compilation of your poems?
Well, I'm working on one now, and that's, I can't believe I did this. The title poem, which, I don't know, we're not I'll read it from I should. It's called Upright, and that's going to be the title of the book. And actually, I had it when I was looking at the one I read. Come to chase us out. And if anybody needs to leave, feel free. Give me a second here. If I can type. Okay. Okay, this is written to my father. By the way, at this end of the table in the north, there's a picture of him and my mother. And then there's the history of Elnora, Indiana, my hometown. He, at the age of, let's see, he was born in 15, and so it was the year of his 70th birthday. And he had pretty much retired from farming. He was a lifelong farmer. But he was also a leader in the community, was township trustee for a while. That's the officer in what we would call a town, but in Indiana they call it a township. Usually square, you know, all the roads. And he had always lived in that town, except for a short time when he was a child in Montana. But his family came back from Montana. And he liked people. He was active in the community, well known, and quite intelligent. He always was kind of sorry that he hadn't gone to college. He got married instead to my mother. But he wrote this history of the hometown, probably coming here. By the way, be sure to take some refreshments when you go. He went to the town, what you'd call a village here, to the town board, and asked to be named the town historian for the 100th anniversary of the town. And, you know, nobody else had asked. So they named him town historian, and he wrote the history. And I republished it. I meant to republish it on the, what was it? Anyway, I didn't get to republish it before his death. But I republished it, a facsimile edition, adding index and introduction and so on. And so this is written to my father. It's called Upright. For my father, Owen R. Rader, 1915 to 2015. One morning when I was 13, on our way to Sunday school, my father turned into a driveway about a half-mile this side of Elnora to deliver something church-related to a member who was ill. He noticed, how could he not, being who he was, that one of the granite pillars beside her driveway had fallen over. "Jim, give me a hand here." I jumped out of the car, and together we hoisted the heavy stone back into its place. He never told me this, but clearly there are things, pillars, corner posts, gravestones, that are meant by nature, and maybe by my father's God, to stand stone solid and upright. And the photograph that I picked to be the main feature of the cover, I think, well, my working title is Upright, New and Collected Poems, or New and Selected Poems, I think, is a gravestone. I guess you'd say an obelisk square. And it's my great, either 3 or 4 greats grandfather. And it happens, I got it on Find a Grave on the computer, on the internet, if you know it. And actually, I've been there, and my second wife, not Meg, she and I did a rubbing of that same stone, which our oldest daughter now has. So I think I'll stop there. Why don't we move into the hall if anybody wants to hang around, look at the exhibits. I'm also an inventor. My patent is there. I have 2, but That's the important one. And I have, in the gift shop, I have puzzle books based on the three-dimensional word game that I invented, which is still not on the market. I'm working on finally a real prototype of this game. If you saw it and knew nothing else, you looked at it, you'd say, oh, Rubik's Cube. I invented my cube before Rubik invented his. But look who's rich, or who. I assume Rubik died rich.
The cookies, if anyone by any chance wants.
Yeah, fill your pockets with cookies.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jim,